Hello there. Today I want to take a look at a wine from the fabulous Ornellaia estate in Tuscany. So we're in Bolgheri. The wine is Volte, well, in fact Volte dell'Ornellaia. It's the 2020 vintage, and this is labelled as an IGT, Indicazione Geografica Tipica, from Toscana. So in fact Volte is regarded as the third wine of Ornellaia. They also produce a second wine, Super Tuscans. And generally the principle is that the second wine tends to have more Merlot in its blend and to spend less time aging in oak. And Volte is almost a progression of that same idea. Ornellaia was founded in 1981. The site here is literally just next door to Sassicaia, the first of the Super Tuscan estates. And what had been found was that here in Bolgheri, on the coast in Tuscany, just south of Livorno, the climate was fantastic for growing Bordeaux-style grape varieties, and the soils were in places very similar to the deep gravels that you found on the Medoc. So for instance, Sassicaia, I believe, means field of stones. So Ornellaia, its next door neighbour, had similar soils, but also had some patches of clay as well, and it was reasoned that Merlot might grow particularly well here. And in fact, they went on to produce Massetto, which is now a separate estate, but yes, Merlot did really well there. The first vintage of Ornellaia was the 1985 vintage, and it progressed very quickly to become one of the world's leading wine estates from that period onwards. That having been said, looking at our website, prices for Volte are at about 1/10 of the price of the same vintage, the 2020 vintage for Sassicaia. So we should be looking at a bargain here if this is a wine that even vaguely approaches the quality of its more august, bigger sibling. Now, the vintage of 2020 started with quite a wet winter. Actually, there was a period of frost in March, and temperatures got down to about 0 degrees. Thankfully, the vines suffered no damage as a result of this. A warm spring with normal rainfall allowed flowering to happen quite rapidly at the end of May. There were some incidences of intense rainfall in June, and the weather changed and it was completely dry to the end of August. As a result, there was a very rapid and very homogeneous veraison, so all the grapes changed colour very quickly and all at the same time, so there was a homogeneous ripeness across the crop. Rain at the end of August caused drops in temperature and gave ideal conditions for the Merlot to complete its ripening, and it was picked fairly early and fairly quickly over a period of just 2 weeks. The weather changed again, and in September there was a heat wave. As a result, most of the other grape varieties were picked early before they became overripe and lost acidity. However, a small amount of rain just at the end of September enabled the last fruit to be picked on the 3rd of October. The different varieties were fermented separately, so the final blend on this ends up with 51% of Merlot, 21% of Cabernet Sauvignon. There's 11% of Petit Verdot, which is a variety that they take very seriously at Ornellaia. But then there was also 10% of Montepulciano, 4% of Cabernet Franc, 2% of Malbec, and the blend is rounded off by a single percentage of Sangiovese. But as I say, these varieties fermented separately in small temperature-controlled stainless steel tanks, and the wine stayed in those tanks to complete its malolactic conversion as well. Half the wine aged for 10 months in oak barriques that had previously been used to age Ornellaia. The other portion was aged in cement tanks, and this gave the winemakers the ability to create a wine that both had tannic structure, supported by the oak, but also retained as much freshness as possible to make it more aromatic and more approachable as a young wine. So let's have a look at it, shall we? To start with, this has a really good colour. I mean, I can just about make out the hem of the glass looking down through it, but that's very close to being opaque. It's a lovely deep, dark ruby red. There is a slight purple note to the rim, but it's more a sort of red purple. Swirling it, the wine has 13.5% alcohol, and it's not surprisingly, it's forming some tears on the glass there. Let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? The aromas are of lovely, ripe, rich, heady Merlot. There's a beautiful lifted perfume. It's not overripe, it's not baked fruit. But there really is a sort of a beautifully fresh, ripe, almost slightly jammy red plum notes to the aromas. little tiny note of oak behind it. There are touches of cedar and graphite, perhaps a chocolatey hint, maybe a slightly milky note. But most apparent is this very attractive red fruit. So let's have a taste. The palate is dry and structured. There's good acidity from the outset. There's a lovely freshness. And that acidity is picking up some very fine, very cedary tannins on the front palate. And that's where I'm seeing them most. And they start off being grainy, and then they become more sort of velvety. There are chocolatey notes. There's a lovely ripeness to the fruit. It's a sort of a jammy ripeness. As I say, it's not overripe. The freshness is still keeping it lovely and plummy. It's sort of red plum through hints of, I suppose, raspberry, loganberry, and perhaps to some mulberry notes as well. The graininess of the tannins is starting to show both through a mid palate, and the mid palate is not particularly broad. This is a wine of mid-weight, and actually I think the tannic structure and the acidity are keeping the wine quite sort of lean, quite elegant, and it's following through to a fresh, structured finish. And that's where you're seeing the oak tannins. There are cinnamon and cedar notes of sweet spice, just delicately on the finish there. And then after that, you get through to this sort of juicy red mulberry and red plum fruit, and you finish with a fresh red fruit. There's a nice mouth-watering aspect right throughout the wine. It suggests that this is a wine that could well be kept for another 2 or 3 years, and I think age would continue to improve. I think the structure would certainly soften, but the structure is not stopping you from seeing the fruit. The structure is, yes, it's sort of in the front palate, but it's not obstructing it. Actually, it's supporting the fruit, particularly on the finish, very nicely. There's a reasonable degree of integration. So actually, I think it's a wine that you could age for the short to mid-term quite nicely. I know it would certainly benefit from that. But at the same time, it's a wine whose freshness enables it to drink beautifully now, because you've got this very attractive red fruit, but you still have the structure of a beautifully balanced quality wine. I can't by any means suggest that if you drink this wine, you'll be drinking Ornellaia for a tenth of the price. However, I can say that the price of this wine makes this a very attractive buy. I think the value for money that this is offering is excellent. I don't think if you enjoy structured Italian wines that you'd regret buying this whatsoever, because there's such a lovely balance to the wine, and the length of flavour, I'm still sensing it in my mouth, despite the fact that I've been talking about it now for probably longer than I should have been. Thank you very much for watching the video. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it, do press the like button. If you have any comments, please leave those in the comments box below. I'll put a link in the notes so that you can find out where you can buy this wine, what its pricing will be, what its availability is, and some more notes surrounding that. If you have friends that you think might be interested in seeing the video, do feel free to pass it on to them. And if you want to be notified of more of these videos, the best answer is to sign up and to follow us, and that way you can sign up to get an alert. But most importantly, do please try and find some time and come and join us for another tasting in the very near future, won't you? Thanks again. Bye for now.